My in-laws reserved most expensive wedding venue in Toronto, then said I'd cover it. My future in-laws secretly booked one of the most expensive wedding venues in Toronto, invited hundreds of guests I had never met, and then announced in front of everyone that I would be paying the bill. They thought public pressure would force me to say yes. What they didn't know was that I had already uncovered their plan. Immediate betrayal, public financial trap, high-stakes humiliation, revenge tease. On the wedding day, the groom is standing in a luxury ballroom while vendors wait for payment. Guests are celebrating. The bride's family is smiling confidently. Then, the venue manager quietly hands him a bill worth more than his annual salary. The groom realizes this was planned. But unlike what everyone expects, he is not panicking. Because 2 days earlier, he discovered something that changed everything. If you've ever been pressured to keep the peace while people took advantage of you, you'll understand exactly how I felt in that moment. Let me back up and explain how the people I trusted most tried to turn my wedding into their payday. Before all of this happened, I thought my life was finally moving in the right direction. I lived in Toronto and worked as a tech consultant. I helped companies improve their computer systems and solve software problems. Over the years, I worked hard enough to build a small business of my own. The money was good, but it did not come easily. Most people only saw the success. They did not see the late nights, the missed weekends, and the years of hard work that got me there. I was careful with money because I knew what it felt like to have none. When I was young, my father passed away, and my mother raised me and my younger brother and sister by herself. We never had much. There were times when every dollar mattered. Because of that, I learned to save instead of show off. Even after I became successful, I stayed the same. I paid my bills on time. I helped my mother whenever she needed support. I helped my younger siblings when they needed money for school or other expenses. I was not loud or flashy. I believed responsibility mattered more than appearance. Maybe that was why public embarrassment bothered me so much. Growing up, I watched people struggle because they cared too much about looking successful. I promised myself I would never become one of them. I also believed something else. I believed marriage should be built on teamwork, respect, and honesty. To me, a husband and wife should solve problems together. Nobody should carry everything alone. That was one of the reasons I loved Emily. She was smart, kind, and easy to talk to. When we first met, I felt like I had finally found someone who understood me. As for her family, I tried to keep an open mind. Yes, they cared a lot about status. Yes, they loved expensive things. And yes, they were always worried about how others saw them. But I told myself that was just their personality. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs were there from the beginning. I just ignored them because I was in love and believed the best about people. The closer we got to the wedding, the more I noticed a pattern in Emily's family. Everything had to be bigger. Everything had to be more expensive. And somehow, I was always expected to pay for it. At first, the requests seemed small. A nicer restaurant for a family dinner. A more expensive photographer for the engagement party. A larger guest list because family is important. Whenever I questioned the extra costs, someone always had an answer ready. We only want the best for Emily. Or my future father-in-law would smile and say, a real man provides. Everyone would nod like he had said something wise. Then they would all look at me. The engagement party was the first major warning sign. Emily and I had agreed on a simple event with close friends and family. I already had a budget and a plan. Then her parents decided the venue was not impressive enough. Without asking me, they started making changes. A larger hall, better decorations, more guests, a more expensive menu. And when the final bill arrived, they expected me to cover the difference. When I pointed out that this was not what we agreed on, the room became awkward. One relative laughed and said, "For a successful businessman, you worry about money a lot." Everyone chuckled. I forced a smile, but the comment stayed with me. It did not stop there. A few weeks later, I was asked to help pay for travel costs so some relatives could come to Toronto for the wedding. Then there were hotel rooms. Then extra family events. Then gifts. Every request came with pressure attached to it. Whenever I hesitated, Emily would take my hand and say, "You know how my parents are." And every time, I gave in. What made it harder was how they treated me when I paid. Suddenly, I was the perfect future son-in-law. They praised me in front of everyone. They talked about how generous I was, how responsible I was, how lucky Emily was to have me. But the moment I questioned a cost or tried to set a limit, everything changed. The smiles disappeared. The guilt started. Looking back now, I can see what was happening. The wedding trap did not appear overnight. It was built one small step at a time, and I was too busy trying to keep the peace to notice where it was leading. About 2 months before the wedding, something changed, almost overnight, at least that's how it seemed. But there were small things that bothered me. Whenever I walked into a room during wedding discussions, conversations would suddenly stop. People would exchange quick looks before changing the subject. If I asked about the venue, the answers were always vague. "We're still working on it. Don't worry about that. We have everything under control." And whenever I tried to discuss costs, everyone repeated the same sentence. "Don't worry about the cost." At first, I pushed for more details, but Emily would laugh and tell me I was stressing too much. "You always expect the worst," she said. Maybe she was right. Maybe all the wedding planning had made me nervous. Emily's father became a different person. The same man who always pushed for bigger expenses suddenly seemed relaxed. He started calling me son more often. He smiled more. He even invited me over for coffee one weekend just to talk. That had never happened before. We sat at his kitchen table, and for the first time in months, he sounded understanding. "We've decided to support you," he said. "Let's make this wedding simple and peaceful." I remember feeling relieved. Those were the exact words I had wanted to hear. Then he told me something unexpected. "We'll handle the venue arrangements ourselves. You already have enough on your plate." Emily smiled immediately. "See," she said, "I told you everything would work out." For a moment, I believed her. After that conversation, everyone seemed happier. Emily became more affectionate than usual. She called me several times a day just to check on me. She sent sweet messages and talked constantly about our future together. Her parents also stopped bringing up money. Maybe I was creating problems that did not exist. That was what I kept telling myself. Then, one evening, a package arrived at my apartment. Inside was one of our wedding invitation cards. The design was beautiful. I smiled as I opened it. Then I saw the venue name. My smile disappeared instantly because I recognized it right away. It was one of the most expensive event venues in Toronto. And in that moment, the uneasy feeling in my stomach came rushing back. On the morning of the wedding, I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine. Even after seeing the venue name on the invitation card, I hoped there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Emily's parents had negotiated a discount. Maybe they were covering part of the cost themselves. Maybe I had worried for nothing. But the moment I arrived at the venue, those hopes disappeared. The place looked unbelievable. Huge flower arrangements covered the entrance. Bright lights lit up the entire building. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. It looked less like a wedding and more like a celebrity event. As I walked inside, my stomach dropped. The ballroom was enormous. The decorations were far beyond anything Emily and I had discussed. A live band was performing near the stage. Waiters carried trays filled with imported drinks. Food stations lined one side of the room, each staffed by different vendors. Everywhere I looked, people were celebrating. And there were so many guests, far more than we had planned. I recognized some family members and friends, but most of the people there were complete strangers. I stood there trying to understand what I was seeing. This was not our wedding. This was something else entirely. Then I noticed Emily's parents moving through the crowd with huge smiles on their faces. They looked proud, almost like they had been waiting for me to see all of this. Before I could walk over to them, a man in a dark suit approached me. "Good afternoon, sir," he said politely. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Something in his tone made my heart race. I followed him away from the crowd. Once we were alone, he handed me a document. "Sir, your in-laws said you'll settle the remaining balance before the reception begins." For a second, I thought I had heard him wrong. Then I looked down at the number. My hands started shaking. The amount was enormous. It was enough to destroy years of savings. Enough to damage my business. Enough to change my entire future. Panic hit me first, then shock, then betrayal. As music and laughter echoed through the ballroom behind me, I realized the truth. I had not been invited to a wedding. I had been led into a trap. I stood there, staring at the bill, while my mind tried to catch up with what was happening. The number on the page did not change. No matter how many times I looked at it, it was still there. A cost so large, it could wipe out years of hard work in a single day. Before I could even think of a solution, Emily's mother appeared beside me. The smile she had been wearing all afternoon was gone. She looked directly at me and lowered her voice. "Don't disgrace us today." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not concern, not kindness, just pressure. A few moments later, Emily hurried over. Her beautiful wedding dress flowed behind her as she reached for my arm. "Please," she whispered, "everyone is watching." I looked at her, hoping she would tell me there had been a mistake. Instead, she looked terrified that I might say no. That hurt more than the bill. Then the relatives started arriving, one after another, like they had been called over. "A man only marries once," one uncle said with a smile. "You can afford it," another added. "Don't embarrass your wife." The comments kept coming. Each one pushed me deeper into the corner. Then the insults started. Small enough to sound harmless, sharp enough to hurt. "If he truly loves her, why hesitate?" Someone else laughed. "Maybe he isn't as successful as everyone thought." A few people nodded. I could feel dozens of eyes on me now. Guests who had no idea what was happening were watching from across the ballroom. The music kept playing. The celebration continued. But around me, the pressure was closing in. Then the master of ceremonies made everything worse without meaning to. He stepped onto the stage and raised his microphone. "Let's give a round of applause to our generous groom," he shouted. Look at this incredible celebration he has provided for everyone today. The crowd cheered. People clapped loudly. Some even turned toward me and smiled. I felt trapped. That was the plan. They had built a situation where saying no would make me look selfish, where protecting myself would make me look cruel. And standing in that crowded ballroom, surrounded by smiles, applause, and expectations, I finally understood how carefully they had set the trap. I quietly stepped out of the ballroom and walked down a side hallway near the entrance. My hands were still shaking. I kept staring at the bill in my hand, trying to understand how my wedding day had turned into this. That was when I heard laughter. At first, I paid no attention to it. Then I heard someone mention me. I stopped walking. A few feet away, hidden around a corner, two of Emily's relatives were talking. One of them laughed and said, "They trapped him perfectly." The other laughed too. Once the ceremony starts, he'll have no choice. My heart sank. I stayed still and listened. "They invited way more people than he approved," one of them said. "Of course. The bigger the wedding, the bigger the bill." They both laughed again. Then I heard something even worse. One relative mentioned family debts. Another joked that after the wedding, I would help solve all of their financial problems. Like it was already decided. Like I was not a person, just a source of money. Then came the sentence I will never forget. At least Emily understood the plan. The words hit me like a punch. Emily knew. The woman I loved knew exactly what was happening. I stepped away before they could see me. My chest felt heavy. But a few moments later, my phone buzzed. A new message appeared. It came from one of Emily's cousins. At first, I thought it was meant for me. Then I realized it had been sent by mistake. The pain was real. The betrayal was real. But something else happened too. The fear began to disappear. The panic faded. In its place came something much calmer, much clearer. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a trapped groom and started thinking like a man with a plan. When I walked back into the ballroom, everything looked the same. The music was still playing, people were still laughing, servers were still moving through the crowd with trays of food and drinks. But for me, everything had changed. I knew the truth now. I knew exactly what they had planned. And strangely, I felt calm. The fear that had been twisting my stomach was gone. As soon as Emily saw me, she hurried over. "Did you figure it out?" she asked nervously. Before I could answer, the venue manager appeared beside us again. This time, his expression was more serious. "Sir," he said quietly, "payment must be completed now." The words seemed to echo through the room. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then people started noticing us. Nearby conversations slowed down. Heads began turning. More and more guests looked in our direction. The silence grew. That was when Emily's father stepped forward. He placed a hand on my shoulder and smiled for the crowd. "You're the man of the house now," he said loudly. Several relatives nodded. A few even clapped. Then Emily began to cry. The tears came quickly. She grabbed my arm and looked up at me. "Please," she whispered, "don't do this today." People around us immediately reacted. Some looked concerned. Others looked disappointed. The pressure was building exactly the way they wanted. One relative shook his head. "A wedding only happens once." Another added, "This isn't the time to make a scene." Someone else muttered, "If he loves her, he'll do the right thing." Every eye in the room seemed fixed on me. They thought I was trapped. They thought I would panic. They thought I would give in. Instead, I smiled. Not a big smile, just a calm one. The kind of smile that made Emily's father suddenly look nervous. Then I turned toward the stage. The master of ceremonies was standing nearby, holding his microphone. I walked over to him slowly. The room became even quieter. "May I borrow that for a moment?" I asked politely. The MC handed it to me without hesitation. Hundreds of guests watched as I took the microphone. Most of them expected shouting. Some expected tears. Others expected an argument. But I stood there completely calm. And that was the moment everything started to change. I stood in front of the crowd and smiled politely. The room was completely silent now. Hundreds of guests were waiting to hear what I would say. I looked around the ballroom one last time before speaking. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming today," I said calmly. "I know most of you have no idea what's happening right now." A few people exchanged confused looks. Then I continued. "There is something important that everyone should know." I took out my phone. A nervous look crossed Emily's father's face. "A few days ago, I learned that I was expected to pay for costs that were hidden from me." The crowd began murmuring. Emily's mother folded her arms. Emily looked down at the floor. I kept my voice steady. "I never signed the final venue contract." That got everyone's attention. Several guests looked toward the venue manager. "The contract for this venue was signed entirely under my future father-in-law's name." The murmuring grew louder. Emily's father stepped forward. "That's not the point," he said quickly. But now, nobody was listening to him. I held up my phone. After I discovered what was happening, I moved all of my wedding funds into protected accounts. I also saved every message, every receipt, and every conversation. The color drained from Emily's face. Then I said the words I had been carrying inside me all day. I came here ready to become a part of a family, not a financial sacrifice. The room exploded with whispers. Guests turned toward Emily's parents. People started asking questions. The venue staff looked confused. Then several vendors began walking directly toward my future in-laws. Not me. The moment. For the first time all day, I saw real panic on Emily's father's face. The plan had fallen apart. Emily grabbed my arm. Her eyes filled with tears. "Please," she said softly, "don't leave." But it was too late. I looked at her for a moment. Then I slowly removed my wedding ring. The entire ballroom watched as I placed it gently on a nearby table. No shouting, no insults, no anger. Just a choice. I turned around and walked toward the exit. Behind me, voices grew louder. Vendors argued with family members. Guests demanded answers. But I never looked back. Because that day was not about revenge. It was about self-respect. And with every step away from that ballroom, I felt freer than I had in years. The drive home that night felt different. For the first time in months, nobody was telling me what I owed them. Nobody was pressuring me. Nobody was trying to make me feel guilty. My phone rang over and over. Emily called. Her parents called. Relatives sent messages. Some were angry. Some begged me to come back. Others blamed me for ruining the wedding. I ignored them all.
Because deep down, I knew something important. The wedding was not ruined when I walked away. It was ruined the moment they decided to turn love into a financial trap. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about what happened after I left. The venue demanded payment from the people who signed the contract. Guests started asking questions. The truth slowly came out. And the same people who had pressured me so confidently suddenly became very quiet. But by then, none of it mattered anymore. I was no longer focused on proving a point.
I was focused on moving forward. That day taught me something painful. People who truly love you will never build a future by trapping you publicly. They will never use shame, pressure, or fear to get what they want from you. Real love is built on honesty. Real love respects boundaries. Real love does not treat kindness like weakness. I also learned something about myself. For years, I believed being a good person meant sacrificing more and more of myself. I thought love meant always saying yes. I thought being responsible meant carrying everyone's problems. But I was wrong. I stopped confusing sacrifice with love, and that changed everything. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, it is this. Pay attention when people only value you for what you can give them. Pay attention when your kindness is expected but never appreciated. Because sometimes the strongest revenge is not humiliation. It is not anger. It is not getting even. Sometimes the strongest revenge is refusing to let people use your kindness against you anymore. And the moment I stopped paying for everyone else's comfort was the moment I finally found peace.